Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of One Room Schoolhouse. My name is Jonathan Ritchie.
And I'm Dave Barton.
And today we want to share with you some of the amazing and incredible stories behind probably one of my favorite kind of huge figures in the early 1900s. Definitely one of my favorite scientific figures. I'm not a science guy, but learning about his life actually kind of makes me more of one to a very limited extent. But his name is George Washington Carver. Now, if you know anything about the name, you'll know he's related to peanuts. He created a lot of amazing inventions using the peanut. He was a scientist at the Tuskegee Institute in Alabama.
I got to jump in. This just blows me away. How can a guy take a peanut, just even one out of the shell of two or three, and come up with 300 inventions and uses for the peanuts?
Around 300 different uses.
I still marvel that he took peanuts and figured out how to make linoleum out of peanut, floor covering. What he did with peanuts, he dissected. He said that God really told him to get into it, and he did. Man, he could take the amino acids and the enzymes and everything else, and he rearranged them. 300 discoveries. I mean, it is amazing.
I think I could come up with maybe one, right? Eat them.
Eat them. That's right. That's right.
And so we'll get into more of his scientific developments later, but to start at the beginning of his life, he was actually born towards the tail end of the Civil War, around 1864. He was born as a slave. But obviously, the Civil War was won by the Union, and slavery was abolished, thank God. And so he was free, but unfortunately, his hardships didn't end there. In fact,
when he was just a year old, he was literally stolen by raiders after he was free. He and his mother were freed. Stolen by raiders, they took him off, never found his mother, but they were able to recover him, and it's kind of like he was in a sack out in the cold, just an infant, and so he suffered from physical maladies the rest of his life as a result of that really harsh treatment early on. But even though he was free, in that period of time after freedom, it was really tough on him physically until he was taken into a home and really cared for.
Yeah, and through that period, as he was taken in and raised, he developed a sincere desire for knowledge and truth. And so like the Bible says, if you seek, you'll find. And so Carver, as a young man, he started seeking after knowledge. He would walk to school. He really was dedicated to his studies, and he became almost prolific in several different fields. He was an amazing painter, he was a musician, and then he also showed an incredible aptitude for science. And so he actually, after going through his, elementary and high school, he gets admitted into college, and he goes to college, and he has some difficulties getting in to one because obviously a lot of racism.
He was actually accepted to college. The correspondence back and forth, they said, yeah, we want you. You got all the credentials. When he arrived and saw what color he was, they said, no, we don't take you at this school. Simply because, not of his qualifications, but because of who he was by race, by color, by what God made him. They said, we don't take you.
However, he found another university that did accept him. He actually became the first African American to graduate from that university, and with high marks. They actually hired him on afterwards because of just how good of a scientist he was. And then he started receiving job offers from really all sorts of places, but the one that stood out to him was from Booker T. Washington, the founder of the Tuskegee Institute down in Alabama, and he decided that's where he wanted to take his talents, and that's where he felt God was leading him. So he went and he actually taught at Tuskegee Institute for almost 50 years throughout the rest of his life, and while there, he just did incredible things.
And by the way, you said that he felt that was where God was leading him. One thing you'll find about Carver is he really was a God-centered guy. He talked about the fact that he felt like nature was God's megaphone, and so he would go out and walk through nature and listen, and it would seem like the Lord would just speak to him and tell him this thing about different plants and what he saw, and he went back scientifically and was able to validate all that he heard. So he had a very, very, very strong daily relationship with the Lord. He said every day before he went in his laboratory, he would kneel down and pray and say, God, what do you want me to do today? What do you want me to find today? What do you want me to look at today? And he felt like after the Lord spoke to him, he'd go to his laboratory and start working. So he was a very strong God guy throughout his life.
Absolutely. Even at Tuskegee, he was asked by the students to teach a Bible class on Sunday afternoons. And at the height of it, he was having over 100 students at this Bible study, which is, massive. That had to have been a huge percentage of the student body at that time. And like what you...
And by the way, understand where we have universities today with over 100,000 students, and we know of at least two with more than 100,000. Back at the time of the Founding Fathers, a few generations before Carver, the entire University of Princeton might have 40 to 50 students in all the classes put together.
And it didn't get that much bigger even by
That's right.
Carver's time.
That's right.
And so he was just a massively influential guy at Tuskegee, and based on his reputation of really helping the Southern economy and the Southern agricultural field recover from their overdependence on cotton, he really preached the ideas of crop rotation, and he published upwards of 30 different tracts and bulletins specifically about different aspects of farming. You can actually read them online. I'm not, in case you couldn't tell, I'm not much of a farmer, but I found them really interesting. And in fact, he talks about God in those bulletins as well as he's teaching the very poor rural farmers of the South how to better be stewards of the land and the resources that God has given them. They're really incredible. And based on his scientific research and really based on his dedication and sincere devotion to God, he gets asked by people all across the nation to come and speak.
He is asked to speak, and this happens to be some of the brochures we own about him. It says, "A Crusade for Christ." Cross up there at the top, and it has his name there, and this is the program that went with it, A Crusade for Christ, and that actually has the hymns in there that you'll sing as part of the crusade. So he was very open in sharing his testimony, and as he would share his testimony, it really was a testimony. It wasn't preaching per se. It's, here's what God did with me. Here's what God can do with you. I listened to God when He told me to do this, and if you'll listen to God, He'll tell you what to do. It was very good, very uplifting. He has a number of books that were published that were about listening to God. It says he heard God's whisper is the title of this book. So there were a number of religious pamphlets. Now, he's a noted scientific guy at the time. Matter of fact, you had Edison who went to him and tried to hire him on. Edison was going to give him a huge
Thomas
salary.
Edison, right? The famous inventor
right.
of the light bulbs.
Thank you.
Edison tried to hire Carver. He offered him, I think, over $100,000 to
which was massive back then in the 1920s and 30s.
Amounts. But he said, God has called me to Tuskegee and to the, helping the Southern agricultural. He was really good friends with Henry Ford as well. They traveled with each other. In fact, I was reading just last night, Ford and Carver would do interviews together, and when the interview would ask Ford a question, sometimes Ford would just say, you know what? Ask George Washington Carver that question because him and I think the exact same on everything. It was really cool to see him, be a leader in science, in technology, in innovation, and in religion too. This is actually a picture from that Crusade for Christ he was at. It's actually signed by him right there. You can see his signature, G.W. Carver. This was actually signed in 1939, so that's his signature right there. And if you were to go, you can actually find this book online as well, George Washington Carver in his own words. I challenge you, find this book, pick it up and read through some of his letters, and you'll be astounded at just the clarity that he looked at the world around him, and especially his devotion and dedication to God for really all of what he did. The Bible tells us, and all that you do it for the glory of God. And I think Carver is a really good representation and example to look up to in that fact.
And if you don't know much about George Washington Carver, at WallBuilders we have this book available on the web, George Washington Carver. It is a great introduction and a great overview of a man who had a huge impact on America because he really was a God guy. And you can find this at wallbuilders.com.